So thanks, there you go, Tyrant, all yours.
All right, just going to share my screen. Hopefully that's coming through.
Yep, it is here.
Sorry, just getting used to WebEx. Haven't used it in a while. The application is not responding.
Oh,
Good. Let's try again. Let's try again. I'll just while that's loading. So my name's Taryn Metcalf. I work for Melbourne Water. I work in the water supply section of the business. My role is particularly around maintenance and reliability, failure investigation, and sort of PM management and a few other bits and pieces. Prior to my current role, I led a project which hopefully you can see on the screen now.
Yep.
Which was particularly around looking at our preventative maintenance records and job plan records within our CMMS system, which is Maximo. So we led a project for about 18 months, just over, to review and update a pretty large quantity of our PMs and job plans. That was just a couple of things about that, so I'll just sort of go through the presentation.
Just 2 seconds, mate. Sorry to jump in. Can you just, if people want to ask questions, put their hands up on there's a little button to raise your hand in the WebEx thing, and then we can, Tyron can pick up the people as we go through.
Please ask questions as you go along. It's very informal. Kind of threw together some stuff and pulled up an old presentation from a couple of years ago. So the project that we went through was we were basically tasked with reviewing all of our preventative maintenance schedules that had a frequency between 1 week and 12 months. That was the goal that we were set up. We were set up as a team of 4 planners, and we had 1 admin support staff. And basically over that period of 18 months, we went through a process of interviewing, I think it was sort of over 50, maybe close to 60 different technicians, and 10 different operators from across all of our water and sewerage business. And basically from that process, we updated 7,000 PM schedules and over 9,000 associated job plans to those. And mostly, so when we're talking about the reviews that we were doing, we were looking at a lot of the information that sat within Maximo, within our CMMS. So we're looking at descriptions, we're looking at frequency units, the tasks, the actual scope of work that we were doing, duration, permits, what we call condition for work, labour and craft estimations, materials and subcontractor services. So we were looking at all that information on the PMs and job plans, primarily with a focus of looking at enabling a more effective planning and scheduling process to have that kind of better quality data in our system was really the focus. We didn't challenge the maintenance strategy on the equipment. We took the position that we were looking at improving planning and scheduling data. Maintenance strategies had been previously set up by other parts of Melbourne Water. So where things were obviously wrong, we made some changes to the maintenance strategy, but in general, we were running with the assumption that the maintenance strategy was in place. And that was sort of based on the resources we had and the goals of the project and the outline and the timelines. So that was also improved data quality to support effective planning and scheduling. And we wanted to improve the ability to forecast future PM costs was basically the other outcome that we wanted to do. So previously, and maybe other areas have done this as well, we looked at using previous historical spend as a forecasting tool for future spend. We've now moved more to relying on the forecast for PMs that come out of Maximo as the basis for the PM spend forecasting. Project objectives. So we were looking at to improve the accuracy of the PM work order forecast. So we wanted better costing information, duration, planned materials, services, subcontractors and vendors that we were engaging to do specific items of work. We were looking at the number of PM work orders that we were forecasting. So we wanted that to be accurate. We wanted to know how many work orders were going to come out over a forward period. And we wanted to just have a clear handle on that as much as possible. Second objective, enabling uplift in effective planning and scheduling of PM work orders. So a lot of our PMs had a heavy reliance on leading hand or technician knowledge about some of the parts you needed, some of the materials, some of the kits you needed, how long jobs took, kind of what should be done with what. So we're trying to embed a bit more of that information into our CMMS to help planning and scheduling deliver some efficiencies to the business. So yeah, reduction of redundant activities. That's mostly within the sort of process of planning and scheduling was sort of the aim of that one, as well as we also did find several duplicate PMs that we removed because they were embedded within the work scope of other PMs. We wanted to focus on increasing trust and quality of job plan information and work scopes. There is a tendency of technicians and leading hands to not have the most trust in what the CMMS was producing in terms of work orders, and the scope may say one thing, and they may do that plus additional things, or they may have done that activity and not done certain components of it because they know it wasn't relevant to the asset. So we wanted to work on that, basically trust, to say that what the work orders produce is a more accurate depiction of what we really need to do. So that was obviously a bit of a question for us as well. What was the process that we undertook to do this? So we started this project in March of 2020. So we formed a team in February, and in March of 2020, the team started working, and at that moment we all went into lockdown. So it was an interesting point in time because we then immediately shifted our process from initially we were planning to basically work exclusively out on sites. We were going to be talking with technicians at the sites. We're going to meet with them in person, going to do all the interviews with them in person. We immediately shifted to doing that entirely online. And in retrospect, at the end of the project, I'd actually say that we saved the project team a significant amount of driving, a significant amount of traveling, and probably actually we were more efficient working in that capacity because the process we set up actually lended itself quite well to doing that as an online interview with the technician. So that ended up being, it was definitely a spanner in the works in the first month of the project, but it definitely ended up being something that was more efficient. I can see someone's asked a question, but it doesn't flag to me who that is. So maybe just jump in and ask away.
Sorry, on mute. It's Ian. I was going to say, do you not think though you would get a better interaction with? I know you couldn't at the time, but better interaction with people, with trades in front of the equipment, talking about the equipment. You sort of get a better flow of conversation about details.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, yeah, I definitely agree that you get a better interaction. It's better to be there on site, and that was initially our plan to do. Obviously, we adjusted to the what was in front of us, and I guess the work environment we had. In retrospect, there are some things that were harder that we had to work through, but there were some benefits in terms of how the process worked. It seemed to work reasonably well across what we did. So we ended up looking at that sort of circa group of 7,000 PMs, and we ended up grouping them by the type of site they were on, the process or functional system they were related to, the type of asset, the technicians who usually work on that equipment, who's familiar with the PMs, who knows those assets, and the type of review being completed. The type of review being completed was mostly the same across all the PMs we looked at. We looked at those same kind of information around the scope, the planning materials, all that kind of stuff. The things that did vary sometimes was that we looked at various different ways of setting up PMs in Maximo, whether that was using routing or whether it was even the sort of decision points around, do we need to have two separate PMs set up, or can this be combined into one? And so when we said a type of review, we sometimes considered that we were going to merge PMs together. We were going to use a feature in Maximo called job plan sequencing. In a lot of cases, we also considered the use of routing. So some PMs we were individual PMs and we put them into routes. So we did that as well. But anyway, so we came up with these groups. I think from memory there was probably 50, 60, 65 different groups of PMs that we were going to have. So there's packs of PMs that we were going to basically set up for review. We basically then, did some fun couple of weeks with SQL and created very fancy spreadsheets that downloaded every bit of information you can possibly try and extract from the CMS system, put it onto one tab on a spreadsheet, and then used that to basically conduct the interview with a technician, which we did. We did over Teams, and we did that directly out of a spreadsheet. So we didn't work in Maximo inside those interview processes. We found that too slow. It was easier for the planners working the project to just to work in those spreadsheets, to take notes, to document and say, this is not right, this should be different. We should have these tasks should be included, this material, you need this kit, whatever we needed. Document all that, and then and then after that we'd update Maximo. So we'd set those up in sort of 2 to 4 hour sessions with a one-on-one interview between one technician and one planner in the project. We'd be creating work orders months in advance for technicians to be booked in, to scheduled to be doing these activities. And so 2 to 4 hour sessions, sometimes longer if people were game. We usually found that after 4 hours, both the planner and the project team and the technician were sort of were pretty spent in terms of being able to continue to sort of look through details on spreadsheets and actually review and work through what's required for given jobs. We processed about 10 to 15 PMs per hour during those review sessions. Sometimes we're faster because there was a lot of duplication in some PMs. It was the same PM across the same instrument many times, so there was some efficiencies. Other times it was a bit slower when it was more complicated, larger servicing activities on sort of larger mechanical equipment. It was a bit slower. But in general, about 10 to 15 PMs per hour, based on that process of sitting in a spreadsheet with a technician and one planner. Question on the coming up? Sorry, Ian, you're on mute again.
Sorry. I'll let somebody else have a go soon as well. What level of detail do you go to in your PM, in your JPs? Are they? We have a tendency to say what to do, not how.
Yeah, that's a very similar level that we landed in. We like a sort of a relatively detailed list of what to do. Definitely don't go down to ins and outs of exactly how you pull something apart, exactly how you would maintain a piece of equipment. That's either we refer to an OEM manual for that activity or rely on technician knowledge. But yeah, it's a detailed list of what's required to do, with a few other key things called out, like maybe some isolations, maybe some permitting requirements, that kind of thing. But yeah, definitely not writing a sort of step-by-step, photo-based detailed instruction for each job. It's definitely been an ongoing point of discussion around kind of what level of detail do you need. Usually it revolves around, we assume that we're employing a competent, skilled technician, and we assume that they've been, at least at one point in time, shown the site and shown the equipment they're going to work on. And in most cases, they've shadowed someone else doing that job before. So we kind of assume those 3 things when we're talking about writing a detailed list of what to do, not necessarily the individual steps of how to do that.
Yeah, we have that issue where we do that. We have job procedures where in some cases, but not many, we got photographs step by step.
Yep.
It's usually a safety or some you've got to manage and mitigate the need to do that level.
Yep.
But we have questions from regional areas wanting, the team leaders are wanting to use these as training documents for new people and stuff, and we have a struggle with that. Because like you say, we expect the knowledge of how to be understood already. Yeah, it is certain areas worse than others, but yeah, we do have an issue with people wanting to use these for training documents.
We try to articulate that there was definitely interest from various project stakeholders to say, we want detailed, written, photo by photo, step by step instructions. One, we thought in a lot of cases we wouldn't necessarily see direct benefit from that, because a lot of the jobs are they're kind of repeatable enough that they're done often enough by trades that they really wouldn't be looked at that commonly. The second one was that we tried to articulate that that may be required under certain circumstances, and there was a couple that we called out to say when that might be a good idea. The first one was really, really infrequent jobs. So we're talking about sort of major invasive overhauls that may only happen once every couple of years or less. And typically what we found with those was that knowledge within the trade force was low, because you basically get to the point where there's only a limited number of people who have ever done the job before. And so those jobs became candidates, but in our project scope, we were only doing up to 12 months. So mostly we didn't tackle those jobs. The second one was where there's a specific quality or known kind of quality requirement where we haven't in the past been achieving a desired outcome. So maybe a machine's been recommissioned and we've perpetually had problems with it. It's tricky. It's hard to get going back to the right standard. In those cases, we could as well say that's a candidate to be have more detailed instructions. And there are use cases where we've done that for specific bits of equipment, but we didn't tackle a lot of those during this project. We kind of put the vast majority of our PMs into you've got a list of materials, you've got a detailed list of what to do, you've got a skilled tradesman, they're familiar with the site and they've most likely done the job before, that's sufficient for a lot of the jobs that we do. But it's still definitely open for discussion. Another question on the call?
I just have a quick question here. Do you do that any differently if it's a process safety related scenario?
There are, so not in terms of what we did for this project, we applied the same, I guess, quality of review and standard review across everything that we did. There are some specific things, particularly we can identify which PMs of ours relate to a specific regulatory requirement, or sometimes in some cases a process like HACCP or an MHF requirement. Those PMs do tend to fall under additional scrutiny and review, but that review process is separate to what we were doing as a project, and they happen as sort of BAU. So I'll just back to the process slide. So basically, after we completed interviews, we updated Maximo, and typically the planners that within the project were spending 2 days a week interviewing technicians and 3 days a week updating Maximo. That was sort of the time balance requirement to complete an interview, gather information that we need, review previous work orders as well was also included in that. So we didn't exclusively take any information from technicians. We reviewed previous work orders as well. And then, so yeah, 2 days interviewing and 3 days updating was basically the process from that. Following that updating step being completed, we went through we had an internal project QA process. So we sent a list of PMs and job plans that had been updated. There was one admin support staff working in the project with me, and we basically had a series of questions and a series of kind of QA checks that we were running across all of the PMs and job plans that were being reviewed. So statuses was an easy one. Sometimes those PMs or JPs were left in statuses that was incorrect. Sometimes we looked for zeros is basically the easiest one. Look for when someone's put the duration as 0 or the cost estimate as 0 or the hours as 0 or the title's blank, or you look for zeros and blanks is often a really easy way to do some really initial QA. We looked at permitting information, and then we did about 10%, maybe a little bit higher in some cases of spot checks where we reread through work that had been done by the planners. So didn't often find a lot in those spot checks, but we did them as part of our QA process for the project. Andrew, you got a question?
Yes, sorry, just a quick one, hopefully. I just wondered, did your history capture come up in this? So what, if you're doing PMs and doing inspections, you might have been collecting a bit of info. So yeah, we're in the middle of that ourselves. So just interested, as well as, that's a list of stuff I've got to do, but we also then saying, okay, on this pump, we need to actually collect this information. So, we might have been out there with some particular data that you're then collecting. So usually adds a bit of time.
So when we reviewed previous work orders against or from a given PM, we did sometimes look at the sort of BM and CM work orders that came out for that asset as well. Use that to, especially when we thought the frequency of the PM was a bit odd, maybe it was inconsistent with other equipment of similar sort of nature and application. So that was really looking, I guess, at the quantity and cost impact of those BM and CM work orders. We also used previous PM work orders for costings on as a kind of sanity check against what the technician was telling us for hours, material costs, material items used, and vendor subcontract costs as well. So I guess they were the things. But in general, what we weren't doing a maintenance strategy review to say that, should we be looking at a different failure mode? Should we be capturing data about a different mechanism of failure? It was more to do with looking at making sure the PMs were effective enough to be delivered, because there was a lot of problems with planning and scheduling that we're still trying to work through now.
Okay. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah. All right. So that's sort of the process, and I guess the project, and as an overview. The next couple of slides that I've got really kind of talk through, I guess, a lot of the outcomes that we saw. So this is really looking at from what are those particular data elements, those particular pieces of information that we were targeting. What was the actual impact on the our CMS system in terms of how was the quality changing over time, over the life of the project, and in subsequent, I think about 6 months post the project, we did another capture that. So the work orders, so the next slide is they're just graphs. They go through these kind of impacts of what happened. So this is the really kind of high level summary that we produced a lot of the time. So at a really high level, we've got about 15,000 active PM schedules in Maximo when we started the project. Through the review, we actually removed about just under 3,000 of those. And I guess the highlight of that is that we didn't actually change the scope. So we're doing the same work, and we're collecting the same information. We're producing the same level of granularity in terms of a work order, articulating that a particular asset needs to be worked on a particular site. But if we've got 3,000 or 2,700 less PMs to manage, we estimate that we're saving 900 hours a year in administration. So the more PM records you have, the more you have to look at them, the more you have to review them, the more you have to think about when they're being done and what they're being done for. So that was kind of our first, I guess, sort of realization around how we're sort of demonstrating the benefits of this, is that really the administrative load of actually curating and managing your PMs that you have was really quite high. So that was one of the first ones we talked about, just reduction in the number of PM schedules that we have. And that was all through no change the work scope. The second one down below, we talk about PM work orders that we produce. So we estimated that we removed 8,600 work orders a year from being generated. So we notionally put that at sort of at 2,200 hours a year of admin effort. And that's literally just, if you want to push a work order through the system, you have to change its status 5 times. Somebody has to read it. You have to assign a technician to it. You have to dispatch it. You have to maybe put in a PO to a subcontractor. You have to get parts from store. You have to do all these admin things. So we remove that many work orders from our CMS, and we didn't change the scope of what we're doing. So that's just lightening the workload on planning and scheduling. There's also a lot of cases where we'd have really good example. We'd have a work order that is for a battery inspection on a PLC battery backup system. There'd been other PM on the battery charger just next to it. Those 2 work orders, we merged them together and said that they're both being done by one electrician. It's a really simple thing, but in just the way it had been set up in our system, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but it had been broken down quite a lot, and then there was a really heavy burden on planning and scheduling to kind of join this stuff all back together and make sure that we didn't drive out to that site twice. Ian, I think you got a question?
On mute again, sorry. Do you use suppression in your planning processes?
So I'll try and, I haven't worked in SAP before, and I believe SAP, I think suppression is a terminology in SAP. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. My gut feeling is that the equivalent functionality in Maximo is called job plan sequencing. And
Okay.
yes, we implemented job plan sequencing as part of this project. That was, that's where a fair few of those 8,600 work orders came from.
Oh, okay.
Is that so we would use, so typical one, a really typical one was like fire system testing. You've got a 6 month and an annual and a 5 year or something like that. And the annual would come out, but the 6 month would come out as well, and maybe the 5 year would come out as well. And so there was this sort of duplication and confusion about which work order to handle. So yeah, we introduced suppression in SAP language, but job plan sequencing in Maximo language.
Yeah, we're looking to do that next year.
Yep.
In SAP, ready for Maximo in the future years to come. Eventually.
So that did there were some challenges in implementing that. We had to get our regular planners and schedulers used to some different, I guess, places on the work order where different information would appear, because it was slightly different being a job plan sequence PM versus not. But overall, I think in one example, I think I've got a slide about the introduction of job plan sequencing, but it went from something like one site went from being like 18 or 19 work orders a year to like 3 or 4 or something like that, just to manage the fire testing on that one site. So there was a lot of reduction in those work orders, and we had conversations with some of the companies we use for that kind of testing, and they said, oh yeah, it's perpetually confusing why you ask us to do one job but then give us 5 work orders for it. We're not quite sure why there's 5 work orders for one job.
Did you use, do the job plans be at the asset class level or equipment type level, and then the PM brought several job plans together, or did your job plan contain the 5 assets at once or whatever?
So we used a combination of both. So when we were looking at so sometimes we introduced routing. So I think this one site that I'm talking about, I think there was 3 separate fire panels. They listed as 3 assets. They were on 3 separate PMs, and each panel had the sequence of monthly, 6 monthly, annual testing. So you can kind of do the math about where all the work orders came from. We reduced that to 1 PM that routed against the individual asset IDs. So the individual equipment identifiers were on that route for the PM, and then the sequencing of the job plans incorporated the different requirements for monthly testing versus 6 monthly testing versus annual testing. So I think, yes, in question, yes, the PMs are tied to the asset. Whenever we made changes to how we were setting up the PMs, whatever the existing level of, I guess, granularity was that was being achieved by the previous PM in terms of where we're assigning maintenance history to, we maintained that same maintenance history. We never said, oh, we're just going to put PMs at the sort of like, the plant level or something like that, and just say, go find the fire panels. It's no problem. Just they're in the plant somewhere. Just go find them.
So Maximo can apply a history in a route at the asset level individually, can it?
Yes, it can.
But you've got to, I suppose, feedback by job plan, by asset.
You've got the option of there's a couple of options in that space. Maybe we can talk about it offline a little bit, because it kind of gets a little bit detailed. But yes, Maximo has the capacity to generate maintenance history records against individual bits of equipment, even if you might be trying to bundle that work requirement to say you're doing one activity across 5 of the same assets on one site. The history will pretty much always be recorded against the individual equipment, as long as you set the PM up to do that. You can choose not to. Like I think we've got some PMs like handrail inspections. We don't call that individual records for handrails. There's just a generic record that just says handrails at this site. We haven't got specific records for any given handrail.
Okay. Thank you.
So this one here is showing our forecast information. The green bars show our historical spend on maintenance. The blue bars show what after the project was forecasting as our future spend, and the orange bars is what the forecast was showing prior to the project. So this really significantly errors in forecasting, which was wildly different to what we've historically spent, was just due to some, honestly, relatively simple data quality errors that had been replicated across large parts of the system. So project went through and we went through and cleaned up a lot of those pretty early on, and then refined that throughout the process. But basically what we're saying here is that we kind of got the forecast to a point where you can actually rely on it and it's not going to be wildly inconsistent with what we've previously spent. So that kind of trust element of what we actually did, that trust of anyone generating forecasts for the future, increased quite a lot. And now we, in general, rely on the forecast to generate that future spend, not necessarily just an average of the previous 5 years, which I think is what we've done in the past. So really, really simple metrics. So I was saying, when I said one of the QA things we're looking for is saying we're looking for zeros. We wanted to have every PM work order that was produced came out with a planned cost. So prior to the project, we had about 10% of our work orders that didn't have any planned costs. So they came out with basically 0 as an estimate. And then you can see there's sort of the pre and post project. This graph runs over about, about a year and a half. It's basically sort of the front end of the project. You can see how we sort of targeted that to say that we didn't want any PM work order to come out with 0 cost. And that's the sort of evidence that post-project we were sitting at 0%. And I think last time I checked this metric, I think we were sitting at 99% of all PM work orders had a cost. And that's just some churn that's happened since the project that, there's 1% now that come out that don't have costs. Absolute variation between estimated cost and actual cost. So previously, an absolute average variation, 2.1 million per month. And this isn't that we were overspending money. This isn't that we were not spending the right money. It's just that the estimates from some jobs were just wildly inaccurate, and that all compounded to produce that. But at the end of it, so 2.1 down to 360, still a high number. I think that's actually reduced, and even in the last one on that one, it was probably only 150. That's absolute variation as well. That's not pluses and minuses. That's just absolute variation. And I think that's gotten better since then as well. But it's still a question of sort of refining resources, refining the estimates that we've got for those jobs. A couple of questions. Andrew, maybe?
Yeah, just wondering if you can give us a hint of what some of those errors were. Like, was it in the planned estimate, like in your planned hours, a lot of that?
So there was a couple of things. So yes, in planned estimates, the common one that we had that happened was when we used routes in Maximo. So routes, they take the cost of a job plan and they multiply that against the number of assets that you put on the.
Same.
So it's meant to be. So when you write a job plan, it's meant to be how much does it cost to do a single asset, and then Maximo multiplies that by the number of assets you have. Some people, when they set up job plans, they said, "Oh, there's 10 assets on the route. It's $1,000 per asset. I'll put 10 grand on the asset." So you instantly get 10 times that. The second one was that we were sort of half one way, half the other with material planning and estimation for on-condition replacement tasks. So if you've got a PM that says inspect the condition of this thing, and do you want to include the cost of the material that might be replaced? Basically, some of our PMs included it and some didn't. But we've got established process that says if you've got an on-condition replacement PM, you would raise a follow-on work order, and that follow-on work order would be planned and scheduled and then delivered at a later date with the cost of those materials. So we remove some of the materials from the costing process of the work orders in that scenario, but we did include that detail in sort of another place on the work order to say, hey, when you find a condition like this, these are the parts that will need to be sourced and planned and scheduled. So removing those materials had a bit of an extra cost as remove some of that I guess, cost that wasn't really part of the job, but was sort of part of the job, but it's part of a follow-on work order is where it should land. And then, you know, the third is obviously just there is variation between what we plan and what we actually do. And yeah, accounting for those ones. So I guess they're probably the major ones. And there's probably also a few in there where somebody's accidentally typed $1 million instead of some lower number.
Yeah, just a typo. Hey, look, thanks for such a clear answer. That's awesome. Thanks, Tara.
No problem. No problem. There's a couple other questions.
Yeah. Oh, Andrew was first. Go, Andrew.
Sure.
Andrew, you still want to have a chat?
I think Andrew just went. Evan, you want to?
Yeah, no, just a quick question.
Mark,
So, Mark had his hand up first.
Oh,
Mark. Sorry, Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, just a quick question around the project that we're going through here. How long did it take, and how many people were working on this?
On what we've done now, so 18 months, 4 planners, 1 project lead, and an administrator. We spent. I can dig up the exact hours for you, because then the other part of that is the time we spent with operators reviewing permitting and isolation requirements, and the time we spent with technicians. I can dig up the exact numbers of how many hours we spent with technicians, but it was 7,000 PMs, and we did about 15 PMs an hour in terms of review time. So there was hundreds of hours with technicians that we booked in as work orders in advance to schedule with them. So it's not an insignificant amount of time, I guess. The question on resourcing that I would just point out with that one is that the model we chose of having 4 planners sort of dedicated to the project, and then having them being the only ones who inputted Maximo, changed the system, updated plans, was some really, really good detailed conversations that we end up having about what data quality standards are and how you implement them. We really kind of chose, I think we'd done previous projects where we wrote instruction sheets and we gave technicians sort of, you know, an hour every now and then to say, go to an office, log into Maximo and update plans you think are wrong. That imploded and failed abysmally. You get a much better interpretation of getting data consistency and standardization when you limit the number of hands in a system like Maximo. And I haven't used that personally, but I'll go out on a limb and say that it's the same logic. Limit the number of people. You can make 4 people think the same way in terms of data quality standards. You can't do it across large numbers. It's not possible. But yeah, in resourcing, 4 planners, 1 project lead, project administrator, 18 months, plus, you know, it would have been hundreds of hours with technicians and operators.
All right, good. Thank you very much.
No problems. Evan, I think.
Yeah, I just had a good question. So those numbers look pretty amazing. The question is that did that correlate with the actual budget? So were you actually underspending by about $1.4 million per month on average?
So this is, so, you know, keep in mind, we're talking about a job plan in a system that's, you know, depending on your point of view, it's a thumb suck estimate of what a job will cost, or it's a detailed estimate of what we expect the job to cost. So we're talking about the difference between what we actually spend and what we project to spend being completely different.
But not planned to spend, just projected to spend. Is that correct?
Well, they do form. So the job plans now form the plan. So what we put forward as a maintenance budget for next year is based on the forecast from these job plans now. It previously wasn't. But in saying that, I also say that a lot of our budgets are managed. You know, they're managed to the amount in the budget. So we make prioritization decisions around the PMs we're going to do. You know, there's other levers we pull around making sure that maintenance budgets hit maintenance budgets. And largely, and also when you think about the cost, the materials that we spend and use, we're basically going to use the same materials every year. Subcontractor costs go up by a little bit every year. You can't do much about that. We still need to do those jobs. A lot of that stuff is regulatory. And the third one is that we tend to have the same number of technicians working for us year to year. So there's not a lot. So in terms of actual maintenance budgets, there's not a lot. But what we're talking about here is that the accuracy of what we're forecasting is much more in line with what's actually happening than what it was previously.
Sure. No, that's good. Thank you.
I'll move on to the next slide. Duration. So when we're planning a job, regardless of craft hours, one of the key things that came up in planning and scheduling was duration. How long is the job going to take start to finish? Target was 0, basically. We wanted to have no PM work orders that came out that didn't specify a planned duration for that job. And you can see there basically month on month, the percentage of PM work orders that have a duration that's not 0 and the duration versus is. So starting, with that peak there at 20%, averaging maybe 10, 15% over the months prior to the project, and then across the project timeline, projecting to 0. And I'm pretty sure that one's still at about 98, 99% now. So we've still got the vast majority of all of our work orders in the PM space now having a duration planned for them. Pretty easy one to audit and track. Basically looking for zeros. It's what we did a lot of the time, and it's what a lot of the time turned up problems and turned up things that we need to look at, basically. Labor accuracy. So again, absolute variation between planned hours and effort hours, 4,000 to 2,000 is basically the impact. Maybe not as significant as the costing stuff, but it's still a drop in the right direction. I haven't looked at this one recently. I would hope it was gone down more. Variation in planned versus actual servicing costs for subcontractors. So pre-project 900K on average, post-project 82K as an absolute variation. And I think a lot of these absolute variations, the actual plus and minus variation was even less, much closer to 0. But again, this was just basically knowing, I guess, the problems to look for within the way we plan the cost estimates for subcontractors. One of the problems we've still got is that, ongoing CPI increases to what vendors charge us for certain jobs, and just ongoing escalation of prices that occur with prices going up, still not very well managed within Maximo. We've got a dollar figure that's entered at a point in time. We have to then manually revise that when we redo the job or something like that. So that's still a bit of an ongoing issue. This one here is quite specific, but when we talk about engaging a subcontractor, we want the information available in the work order to really enable basically a PO to be created straight away, versus having to go and manually dig through that information and find out. So we've got this definition of good service planning and bad subcontract sub planning. So you can see things that in the poor example. So Maximo has a concept called service items, and they have a name that describes what you're doing. For some reason, somebody decided to load a whole bunch of service items into our system that were called direct costs, which basically just means go and spend money with a subcontractor. They didn't put a cost estimate in there, and they just free wrote Bluefire into the vendor and said, go talk to Bluefire and say, come do the usual job, basically. If we sort of fast forward to what our good definition is there, so a service item is telling me that we're doing gas suppression system inspections. We've got a line cost estimate, which is about $300. And the vendor there identified is actually matching what's in our procurement system. So when that good planning information is generated as a PO, you actually get a vendor that matches our procurement system. You get a cost estimate that's based on something realistic, and you get a description of that service that is more useful than something called direct costs, which was basically useless. So then you get to 30% pre-project down to 0 post-project. Again, this is knowing the fields that should be populated with something, knowing how to report on them, knowing how to analyze them to say what should they be, what are they, and how can we determine when they're not what they should be. So there's probably about 4 different QA rules that when we sent a list of PMs to that QA step in the process that I described, there was probably about 4 different QA rules that each subcontractor service item went through before the project said that was finished. Material costs, I probably won't jump on this one too much, but same thing. Large variation before the project, less variation after the project. It's not perfect, but it's an improvement. And there's still some ongoing issues with materials and how we manage them, but that's a separate issue. But overall, reduction in variation is a more accurate forecast for us to rely on. These slides here, it talks to what's the effort your business has to do to manage the PM program that you have. So the pre-project average of 1,150 job plans means that if you wanted to review every PM work order that came out in a given month, somebody would need to open up, look at, review, change, and revise 1,150 job plans. So you at least have to do 1,150 revision status changes. You have to update the tasks and the materials on 1,150 job plans. Through the way that we structured the reviews, and we had a bit of a focus on reusing job plans in certain scenarios, that dropped by 450. So if you wanted to review every PM that was done in a month, you're only now looking at 700 job plans, not 1,150. So that's just about the admin load of managing the CMS system you have. And although that's a data quality metric, it also, we found that this also starts playing into like reliability, because if you've got the same job plan that's duplicated 4 times and it's across the same equipment, somebody goes in and revises it and they go, oh, I've done that. And then technician next month sees a job on the same asset and they say, oh, it's still shit, it hasn't been fixed. And that's because you didn't look at the three or four other duplicates, or the one that's called something slightly different, but is really the same thing. So we found that a lot of improvement projects were really hamstrung by just the volume. It was really hard to look at the volume. And so if we can work out logical ways to reduce that volume, you got less artifacts in your system. It's easier for the limited number of resources you have to administer those fewer artifacts than more. Andrew, you got a question?
Yeah, just picking up on what you said then around, yeah, obviously if you've done the work and it's on an asset type that you've got a lot of similar jobs. So if it's a pump inspection, you got 100 of those pumps. Was there any frustration in the fact that you sort of had scoped it up not to touch the maintenance strategy? So you would have sort of gone, yeah, look, we can do this once, bash it out, use it as sort of master data on all of these, and that save us a lot of work, and then align the structure of the maintenance plans around it.
We did do that. So we where we saw identical equipment, our general rule was identical equipment on the same site, and ideally within the same process, we would reuse job plans. We saw that as just a logical step to make. If you've got 4 of the same pumps in a pump station, we couldn't come up with a reason as to why we should have 4 separate different job plans for those. So we did implement that as sort of part of the project, so that produced some efficiency for us, because I guess the 9,000 number is probably a little bit, in some cases it's inflated a little bit because we took those 4 pumps and we reviewed one job plan, and then we confirmed that the equipment is the same, and we used that same job plan across the 4 pumps. We didn't, if you rewind in Melbourne Water's history, there was a point in time maybe 5 or 6 years ago where we were completely at the other end. We had like 150 job plans across the whole business, and they were like the most generic things. They were the most generic things you can ever imagine. They basically just said go and inspect and maintain equipment. But we then sort of swung the pendulum the other way, and we ended up creating unique job plans for lots and lots of stuff. And now I think this project, we didn't sort of wholesale swing back the other way and say we want one job plan for every pump. We want one job plan for a pump, and that's it. There's just one pump inspection job plan. We sort of, I guess, it's a bit more nuanced and a bit more sort of logical. Just look through it and go, all right, this one pump station these 4 pumps, they're identical. It's the same process. They have the same duty. These ones can share the same. But I couldn't tell you what the rule is to say, how do you apply that across your whole network? It has to be looked at to say, in this context, it makes sense to reuse. There's probably about 30 or 40 different reasons why in Maximo that you would choose to reuse job plans or not.
Awesome. Thanks again. It's a great explanation.
Ian, question? I think you're on mute, Ian.
Sorry, again.
Third time lucky.
Yeah. So obviously all these reductions and give you more accurate forecasting, but the actual level of work hasn't changed. It's just you're
Correct.
still doing the same amount of maintenance and the same amount of pumps in general, apart from some obscure stuff you said you found.
Yeah.
But it's just obviously a far better way of forecasting. So I guess on the back of that, the business gets more confidence from this and from that work.
Yeah.
Of what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how you're doing it, and where you're spending the resources and money.
Yeah.
As well.
In in 2% of cases, maybe less, 3% of cases maybe, we did find PMs and job plans that were duplication. We could clearly see that you don't need this PM. It's being done somewhere else. Or, we found PMs where 3 pumps had a greasing schedule every month, and the 4th pump had a greasing schedule that was every 24 months. And we changed that, but by rights, as a project definition, the charter that was agreed to by all the management, the engagement with everyone, we said we're not going to change maintenance strategy, but we did. In that scenario where there's 3 pumps at 2 monthly greasing and there's 1 at 24, we changed the frequency.
Yeah.
So we did do that. But it's having less records. Depending on how your organization is structured, about how many people you have to sit around and administer CMMSs, usually having fewer records is a good way to go. You don't want to go down to be, in the really, really generic land. That becomes sort of, I guess, disheartening for technicians, because you sort of just see, it's sort of like an, if applicable, choose your own adventure work order, and that's a bit useless too. So it's a balance, and typically, I find when you're trying to work out how many PMs you need, how many job plans you need, you'll either go with having a limited number of records, and they're really quite complicated to administer. They'll have lots of detail on them. They'll have lots of if then else statements. They'll have other fancy features of your CMMS that you'll use to try and limit the number you have. And the people who understand all those intricacies and all those complexities will be limited. Or you have more records. They're simpler, they're more straightforward, but you've got more of them. So I find you always balance between those. You always swing between those two ends about how many records do you want.
Yeah, we've gone from generic, if installed, do this, if installed, do something different. If you don't fancy doing anything, don't do nothing. To
Yes.
We're now going towards asset class, equipment type, or even size. So if our definition that we're using is if it's got a different set of tasks, it might be a diaphragm pump, but if it's a different design of diaphragm pump with different set of tasks, then we'll create a separate job plan to use. I mean, we have millions of assets, so we have we'll have hundreds of diaphragm pumps out there across the business, and so if they're all an XYZ and that's what you need, that's a list of tasks for XYZ. But an ABC one has different attributes, so therefore different 2 or 3 different tasks, and we're looking to create a different maintenance document, PMIs we're calling them. Therefore, a different job plan to be applied.
Dosing pumps are a good topic. I work in water supply. We have lots of dosing pumps pushing hypo around everywhere. My conclusion with those, and it may respond to the specific context that I work in, that dosing pumps pushing hypo into water supply to ensure disinfection is pretty high on the criticality list of important stuff to do. There are tasks that vary based on brand and model of dosing pumps as well, but largely the thing that drives the to me to say that I want a job plan that's specific to the make and model of dosing pump is that the parts kits are different for each one of them.
Okay.
So if you want to plan that, job and you want to know that you need parts kit A, B, C, then your job, and then you can't reuse that job plan against a prominent dosing pump versus a Grundfos dosing pump. You just can't do it, because unless you build in some really complicated rules that say a job plan will sort of evaluate whether it's a Grundfos pump or a prominent pump and select the right parts, which you can do, but I've never bothered trying to investigate, because the complexity in that is really, really high. And it also relies on a lot of other data quality being really, really good to make sure that you get the right parts on the right work order. So
Yeah.
for that example with dosing pumps, for me, the standard is that you should write you've got a prominent, I don't know, Gamma X pump or whatever it is, then you should have a job plan that says Gamma X pump annual service or whatever the frequency is.
Yeah, we don't collate right now the bill of materials to the job plans yet. We're not that far.
Yeah.
We're not in a Maximo yet. We're still in SAP, but yeah, we're looking to equipment type driven. Sorry, Ray has a, is it Ray? Yeah, Ray has a question.
Sure.
Hi, Darren. A quick question around how do you manage PM suppression? So let's say, you are sending crews to a pump station 6 monthly to do lubrication, and then there's also an annual job coming up.
Yep.
Do you still have 2 work orders coming on that second time when both 6 monthly and the annual is due? Or there's a way to sort of suppress that 6 monthly and you only have one work plan?
So in Maximo, which is my experience, there's a feature called job plan sequencing, which I've got a slide that goes through the example. And there's been a couple of questions on it now. I might go through that as well. But it allows basically that to happen. It does suppress the lower frequency activity when the higher frequency activity is required. The caveat to that is that you write a job plan for each instance that you want a work order to be produced. So if there's a 6 monthly job and there's an annual job, the annual job plan that you write needs to include the tasks and the steps and the resources and the materials to do the 6 monthly job as well. So you do end up putting some information into 2 job plans. So you do that twice.
Okay.
But I think the way to look at that for me is that there's admin in terms of managing the job plan so that the correct information comes out on a work order. There's a higher cost to the business and to efficiency of delivering work if you're producing work orders that is confusing to planning and scheduling, is not being dispatched correctly, and people or subcontractors are attending site on multiple days to do what should be one job. So yes, there's more admin in making it work at the front end correctly, but it'll cost you more if you have it confusing and you have to get the same people driving at the same sites on multiple days and they go, weren't we just here? Didn't we just do half of this job last week? So yeah, there are also some other particularly complicated features of Maximo as a CMMS that allows you to avoid that duplication. I personally don't think they're worth using, but they do exist. So you could look at those if you wanted to try and limit that admin burden at the front end. I assess them as basically not worth the hassle.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Darren.
That's right. Next slide. So this is basically the same as the previous slide. It's just with unique PM records. So not job plans, but PM. So you can see an equivalent drop in the number of PM records, basically, that was coming through. I won't dwell on that because I think we covered a lot of the questions in the previous slide as well. But again, 1,200 PMs per month down to, and that's PM schedule records, not work orders, if that makes sense. Down to 830, so 370 drop per month. How many work orders are we cancelling per month? So a lot of this comes down to that suppression question around, are we using the suppression or job plan sequencing function to not produce work orders we don't need? There was a lot of duplicate work orders that came out where we used to see these comments from technicians where they said they close a work order, they didn't book any time to it, and they said, oh, done, there was a specific work order for like one component of a service. And they said, oh, I did this on the other service work order for the same asset in the same month. So those work orders were sometimes just cancelled. So we saw a reduction in cancellation work orders, although I'm not sure I'd call that a significant reduction. It's probably maybe just more variation in what was happening, but maybe there was a relationship there between what we looked at and what we cancelled. Not sure. I was going to go through some examples of PMs in our system, but I might just go through. There's just one more slide on job plan sequencing that I might go through now, or I can go through the examples. I don't mind if anyone has a preference one way or the other. I'll do the sequencing slide. Ian, I think you might have even gone to Hoppers Crossing pump station when you were here, so you might know this. Yeah. Oh, it's one of the it's one of the two big ones that are about 20 minutes drive from the city. So you may have gone to this
11 stories deep, the dry well.
Oh, maybe
2 cranes on it, the stages, because it was so long.
Might have been that one. Anyway, so what did we have? So there's 3 fire panels at this site. Each panel requires 4 tests, monthly, 6 monthly, 12 and 60 months. So what we previously had was 12 unique PMs generated 45 work orders per year. So that's the, now keep in mind that we had, so what those 45 work orders were trying to be translated into was we needed Blue Fire, which is the company we use, and I'm not spruiking any particular company, it's just the one that we happen to use for this job. We need them to attend site 12 times over a year to do the testing required on these 3 fire panels. And then what planning and scheduling was doing was, and the techs who were managing the work orders was sort of shuffling those 45 work orders into those 12 visits about which ones happened when and which service reports got uploaded to which of the 45 work orders. There was only ever 12 service reports produced. There was only ever 12 POs raised, and there was only ever 12 invoices received from the vendor. So we did this 12 times. What we changed that to is that we have, instead of having 12 unique PMs, 1 for each fire panel for each month, 6 monthly, 12 monthly, 60 months, 1 PM generates 12 work orders a year. So we've removed 33 work orders from that process. It's straightforward, especially when you see it like this. Yep, it's logical. We go to site 12 times, we should have 12 work orders. But I guess depending on how you choose to set up Maximo, you can fall down the trap of saying, or any CMS, I think, you can choose to fall down the trap of saying there are reasons why we need 45 work orders. But from a works management perspective, it doesn't help. So that's what the change was in that particular example. The 6 monthly, 12 monthly, and 60 month tests were all rolled into job plan sequencing. So that's basically just how it works out. Don't know if that was helpful. Was there any questions on that one in particular?
No, that makes total sense, Darren. Sounds good.
Yeah, it's logical stuff. I just had to spend a long time talking about explaining to people what logical was. That's the problem. All right. So I was just going to show a couple of examples. If people wanted to see that.
You're all right recording data that's from your
systems. Maybe pause this bit.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
Pause the recording.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Andrew, you had your hand up there a minute ago. Are you okay?
All okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. No worries. Has anybody got anything else from this great conversation? It really was.
Yes, I've got a quick question. This is Kate. How you doing?
Hi.
Yes, my question was that feedback you were talking about with the like condition information. So you do a piece of work, there needs to be replacement, renewal, extra work done. So that goes back in the feedback. And then what triggers, I guess, the new work order being generated? Like presumably there's some sort of person interaction there.
So the requirement for further action is to raise a service request, Maximo record to saying we want, I think called notification in SAP, which is then triaged by a central group that I'm a part of. And then we create work orders to manage those. I'll say probably 8 times out of 10 when we get service requests in to the sort of in tray, it's a conversation with the technician who's raised it is what happens, because no matter how much you ask for sort of all the information and all the context to be provided in a written document, you have to have a conversation with the person who raised it. So yeah, if there's a record, it's a service request, it's related to the PM work order. There's a mobile app the techs use to raise that. But yeah, 8 times out of 10, whenever you get one of those, it'll be a conversation with them about what's going on and what's happening. If not a site inspection, if something is particularly unusual is going on.
Yes. Okay. All right. Cool. No worries. Thank you.
Ian,
Sorry, mate. Just a side note on that. It might be a different conversation, but do you then measure the level or the amount of subsequent work orders or service orders against particular planned maintenance activities? Is that more of an RE type of question? Different conversation.
We measure what we call PM yield. So we'll be trying to track of a bunch of inspection PMs that are produced. We expect a certain number of those to produce service requests that identify defects that need to be fixed. I don't know if anyone's heard this. I don't know where I heard it from, but it's just sort of the industry. One of those rule of thumb. Everyone sort of aims for 1 to 6. We do see something near that. A lot fall under it. Some fall over it. But yeah, we do track the number of service requests that come off a particular inspection program. If we're seeing a lot, we'll consider upping the frequency of that PM. If we're seeing very, very few, consider lowering the frequency of that PM.
Or do you just up and lower the frequency, or do you go back and have another look at it for Mika to make sure that you're focusing on the right failure modes?
Context specific. So sometimes we will look back. We'll send that back to sort of as an asset strategy group. I'm more in the sort of maintenance and delivery area, and so I guess we've had a long ongoing discussion around, I guess, what's the sort of curation and management of the existing maintenance strategy, which is what we do, versus when do we trigger the point to say need to redo the whole maintenance strategy for Mika again.
Okay.
It's a pretty fine line, but if there's servicing activities that are at a certain frequency or there's inspections at certain frequency, and we want to sort of push them slightly one way or the other, especially if they align with practical reasons, like we know a technician is going to that site on that frequency anyway, so it's not much of an additional impost cost to do it. We will make those changes, but if at a certain point we'll say no, the strategies.
Well, I think we've got something similar, some sort of procedure similar to that as well. So if it's a change to strategy based on different failure information, yes, it goes back through the RE process, or if it's just a change of term or some modification to the document, or even frequency based on, like I said, some clear guidelines, then we can just change. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, thanks.
We found that as a healthy balance between being able to continuously improve strategies and not be reliant on a central team that's they're not out at sites, they're not there as much, they just don't have that visibility as much. They're a bit more kind of Formica theory focused than seeing the equipment day to day.
Thanks. Cheers.
So one more question. So I can't see who's the name it's from.
Darren, I just do have a more general kind of question.
Sure.
In light of engineering registration in Victoria, for example, do you have to come up with a way to sort of manage, reviewing your maintenance strategies and all that? How does that play a part for making those decisions? Because you have to be, degree qualified or chartered engineer or something like that to be able to do certain things on the design, maintenance, and operations. So did you have to sort of do something in particular in that regards to be able to sort of, take on this project?
It's a really good question. I'm just going to put my hand up and say that I don't think we have the answer to that at the moment. I know, Andrew, you asked a similar question not that long ago. We employ a management of change process where that's applicable. There are various other checks and balances that we use about changing the strategy of maintenance that we're using on a given asset. How that applies to the context of a registered engineering process, I just can't comment. I'm not fully aware with what all the requirements of those registration is yet, but it's definitely a work in progress. What I do know is that if there is a more stringent requirement for review and sign off to various changes that are currently made by a registered engineer, it'll be quite a large administrative burden on us as a business.
I was just going to say if there's anyone else on the call or the future meetings, and I was keen we put that one on next year's maybe to-do list, is engineering rego, and as Taryn's explained, the impact on us all.
I know that mechanical engineering registration is coming up quite soon in Victoria. I think before the end of this year, and there's some mechanical principal engineers in the central team that are asking me to get registered as a mechanical engineer. It's not my trade, it's not my training background. I've done a fair bit with it recently, but it's just a bit sort of challenging then, because it's sort of the role I work in, and I don't know about anyone else, but it's a bit jack of all trades. It's sort of first line engineering response to a lot of problems that happen in the field. So I don't know how you manage that into the registration mechanism. If anyone else can answer that question for me, I'd love to hear it.
You guys are ahead of us. So like, I think you're structural. You went structural civil first discipline. ACT is moving to it, and apparently we're following Victorian process while we were reaching out to Clinico. How do you do this, and how do we learn off you guys? And then and Queensland were ahead of us all, so they've been in there for a long time. So that's why I thought it'd be good to share. And the West, you're not there yet, are you?
No, not this stage. No.
We there definitely wasn't the more central engineering area of Belmore kind of tackled this, because the role structure and team structure is much more discipline based. In the sort of the works delivery area, which is where I work, it's a bit less discipline based and a bit more kind of, I guess, area and process. So as I said, you're a bit more jack of all trades, and your first engineering response to a lot of things. So yeah, it needs to be worked through.
Thanks for the comments.
That's right. Ray, question?
Oh, yeah. Is that from before, or you got a new one, right?
Thank you.
Okay, well done.
Right,
Ian, I promise you 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's all right. Thank you very much. I'll stop the recording now, and then we'll talk about the future direction and subjects that we decided then. So thanks very much for that. Tyrone, excellent and good interaction with everybody. Thank you.
No problems.